warm welcome to Living the Dream French Riviera, the podcast where we explore women's professional journeys while relocating to the south of France. I'm your host, Cécile Côte. Today's guest is Faye, whose path to the Riviera began in the film industry, traveling between London, Madrid, and finally Monaco, where love rooted her on this stretch of Mediterranean. After years working as a production coordinator in the demanding world of cinema, Faye made a life-changing decision when motherhood reshaped her priorities. What followed was not an overnight transformation, but a slow, courageous reinvention. In the midst of the financial uncertainty of the 2009 crisis, Faye turned a deeply personal yoga practice into a sustainable career. With the support of local women's networks and steady persistence, she built a loyal community around a style of yoga that is intuitive, kind, and rooted in respect. In this episode, we talk about career transitions, financial reality, and what it truly means to build a life that aligns with your values. And of course, we reflect on Riviera life beyond the glamour. Faye, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to hearing your story, what first brought you to the Côte d'Azur, and how life here eventually led you to yoga and teaching. Let's understand how all this started. When did you first move to the Riviera? Where were you coming from, and what was life like at the time?
Okay, so I had left England in 1986 and moved to Madrid in Spain with my first husband. And I'd been there for 10 years and I was working in the film business at the time. One of the films brought me to Monaco. Things were kind of dodgy anyway with obviously working in the film business. We spent an awful lot of time apart from each other, my lovely ex-husband and I. I came to Monaco to work on a film as production coordinator, and I met José, my second husband, who is of Spanish origin, and he was the location manager. And so we were working very closely together. I'd forgotten all of the French that I'd learned at school, and then I went to Bristol Poly after that. So José and I had that kind of natural connection because we could speak Spanish together, and also our jobs meant that we collaborated very closely. We fell in love, and so I left Madrid and I moved here. So that was in 97. So I've been here, I can't even count that, nearly 30 years. Nearly 30 years, yeah. I spoke very little French, but I had studied French until quite a high level. So it's very interesting with languages. It was all still there. And I have a really profound memory of trying to talk in French with somebody in a bar when I first arrived here. And all that was coming into my head was Spanish. And then all of a sudden, I came out with this phrase, "Je me suis rendu compte que." And I thought, where on earth? It doesn't matter what it means. And then I realised that. And it was all there, but it very much depended on who I had in front of me. There's a definite chemistry when you're talking in a foreign language with the person to whom you're speaking. And some people made me feel very comfortable and it was easy to talk to them. And that happens even today. My French is fluent now, my Spanish is fluent, but you put me in front of certain people and it disappears. My first impressions, having left Madrid, where especially I was there during the 80s and the early 90s, and it was La Marcha, it was a city that never ever slept. You'd be out, coming home from a club at 4 o'clock in the morning and there were traffic jams. Suddenly I arrived on the Côte d'Azur and it was so quiet. I remember at the time I smoked cigarettes, trying to find cigarettes after, 7 o'clock at night, trying to find a restaurant that was open for lunch after 1:30 in the afternoon. So that really struck me and I found it very quiet, very sleepy. But then, after about a year, I went back to Madrid to work on a film and couldn't stand it. It was so noisy and so dirty. So I also remember being quite surprised because the Côte d'Azur was reputed to be, one of the most beautiful places on earth. And I was very surprised to find that the beaches were all pebbles. I was expecting white fine sand. And I remember that really struck me at the time. Now I've come to appreciate those pebbles. You just have to be wearing the right footwear to be able to walk into the sea.
What was the biggest adjustment when you just arrived?
Apart from finding cigarettes late at night. The language was difficult in the beginning, but of course I was immediately living with José. We kind of went in without any looking back. We were both by then in our mid to late 30s, so we didn't kind of hang around. We were living together, so he was a huge support to me. His son was 7 at the time, and he didn't speak Spanish or English, which José did. So with Joris, he was a huge help to me with my French. That was an adjustment. It took me a while. The sense of humour was an adjustment. But also, I lived that life back then where I was still travelling a lot. So I'd be in France, but I remember after just a few months, I then went back to Spain to work on a film. I went to England to work on a film. I was still quite cosmopolitan, getting a little dose of different things as and when I needed them.
So you managed to transition from one country to another one, which is quite remarkable. Still, that's not your professional occupation today. So.
No, no, I changed completely. Just going back to that transition, of course, I'd already done that when I'd moved from London, or Bristol originally, and then London to Madrid. So I'd already I was quite good at transitioning by that time, and so Madrid to France really didn't feel like such a huge leap. And then what happened, so I was working on films whenever I could. I was also doing some translating work when there were no films. I'd managed to negotiate my way with the help of José through the French system. I was what was called back then an intermittent du spectacle, which is like a freelance film worker. It must have been a nightmare of paperwork, but as they tell me is the case with giving birth, I think I've kind of forgotten all of that. Alongside my career, my dream, although I was hugely lucky to work in films, that had never been my dream. My dream was to have a family. It hadn't worked with my ex-husband. He was much younger than me. We didn't have that same dream necessarily. By the time I got here, I was, as I say, 36 or 37, and family was hugely on my mind. It wasn't to be, naturally, so with José, we went through quite a few cycles of IVF and eventually decided that we would adopt. The decision was one thing, the actual getting there was another. It took us 4 years in the end, from beginning to end, to adopt. If you had told me that when I'd started, I wouldn't have started. Before that, we'd had, 4 or 5 years of IVF treatment. I was doing that in parallel with my career. Eventually, it's a story for another podcast, probably, but eventually Lilia arrived in our lives. She was only 3.5 months old. She came from Guatemala. And when she arrived, I was still working with a film producer who is based in Villefranche, which is about an hour's drive from where I live. I managed to negotiate things. I was working with her 3 days a week, and I was taking Lilia in to work with me. She was a baby. She was 3.5 months old. That worked for a while. And then when Lilia was about 18 months old, 16 months old, with this film producer, I promised her that I would go to London for 2 weeks to help close the financing of the film. So I had to leave Lilia. And I was very gung-ho about it to begin with, until we got to the airport. And leaving her, I felt my heart was going to leave my body. I was in such a state. That's when I realised I couldn't carry on working in films, because it's very unusual to find work in films in the city in which you live, you know. And it's also very difficult to work on films in the city in which you live, because you're working 20 hours a day. It's so much easier if you're off somewhere in a hotel away from your family. So I decided that I had to stop the film business. This coincided with my husband qualifying. He had also completely changed career, gone back to university, supported by me, because I was lucky enough to be working with this producer, and he'd become a clinical psychologist. So as soon as he qualified, that kind of coincided with me saying, I am never ever leaving Lilia again. I've waited 44 years to have her. I am not leaving. But what could I do? What could I do? He'd qualified, and his business was taking off, but you know, it was going to take a while. I kind of considered taking a normal office job. I really didn't want to do that. And I had started, yoga was already my passion. So I was already a practicing yogi. I'd been practicing yoga for many, many years as a way of dealing, amongst other things, with the whole infertility journey. And, you know, they say, turn your passion into your career. So it started with one woman. She wanted me to teach her some yoga, and I wanted her to teach me pottery. So we started like that. And I just discovered this joy in teaching, in transmitting what I love and know so well. I could never, ever have been a salesperson. I could never sell something that I'm not passionate about. But yoga, I was so passionate about it. And so teaching came very, very naturally to me. And so that's kind of when it started. But of course, then I wasn't a legal yoga teacher, if you like. And that's where I started going to my first entrepreneurial group. It was many years ago. It really wasn't the fashion. It was a little group called Premier Mardi, run by two, which means the first Tuesday of every month we would meet. And it was run by two of my friends here. And that was so helpful to me. They were the people within that group. They were so supportive. It was all women. And they got me through the bureaucracy of setting up as an auto-entrepreneur. That means just a freelance worker, basically, but no longer in films. I set up as a translator and a yoga teacher. That gave me legitimacy that allowed me then to create my website. I was quite good at all of that technological stuff. That was from the film business. So I made my website and I started teaching. I just threw myself into it. I had very tiny groups to begin with, mostly made up of friends. I was translating at the same time. And of course, my husband was working as well. It would have been very difficult to do that, I have to say, as a single woman. I don't think it would have been possible, or I would have had to have carried on working in films and just done yoga as a hobby. I do remember at one point, I think it was 2009, there was the financial crisis and we were so badly off, Jose and I, and it was quite panic-provoking. And that's when I thought, I have to go and get an office job. And I talked to my sister and she said, Faye, yoga is your baby now. You have to absolutely nurture your baby and let your baby grow. I had Lilia, she was 4 or 5 by that time. She was born in 2004. So I was nurturing 2 babies, but that was the best advice that I was ever given, to really focus on what I was doing. And then through Premier Mardi, I'd met some really inspiring women, one of whom kind of acted as my coach. I was asking her whether she thought there might be more business in Antibes, which is a coastal town, again about an hour from where I live, but there are a lot of Anglophones who live there. And she said yes, but she said what you have to do is, instead of offering the odd class now and again, you have to really go for it. And you have to say, what I'm offering is 1 month, 3 times a week, early mornings, bish bash bosh. And that's what I did. And it was a huge success. And that's how my career then took off.
Would you say it was a success because people were committing, or straight away for 3 classes?
Yes, I think the problem with this area in which we live is it's very transient. People come and go. People work on yachts. People's husbands work on yachts. So people have family all over the world. And so it's a very transient area. And so what she said was, if you just offer people 1 month of intensive yoga 3 times a week, that's easy to commit to. Committing to a year, and I knew this through my own work in films, I knew that committing to anything for even 6 months is really difficult because you never know when you're going to get a phone call to go off to work. But committing for a month is actually quite easy. So I did that a few times, the month intensive course, and I remember, the price was fair, and I offered people a yoga mat as a little bit of that. All of this came through this lady who acted as my coach. Then I offered the same intensive in Roquefort-les-Pins, which is another village much closer to me. So that was a whole other audience, or public, if you like. And people really enjoyed the style of yoga that I teach, which is very different. That created a demand for more regular classes. And so then I kind of switched. I stopped doing the intensives and I started doing regular group and private classes.
It must have been difficult to juggle with family life, because with early mornings, you had to leave home early every day.
Yes, you're right. And again, it's something that I've kind of forgotten. I guess that we were both, José as well, as a psychologist, could pick and choose his hours more or less. I mean, he was just beginning as well, although he was 45, 46 by that time. It was a new career for him, so he had to be a little bit careful. But yes, I suppose in Antibes, I would leave here at 6, so he was still at home, and I would be home by 9, and I guess that we just juggled it. I do remember one thing, people saying to me, it'll be much easier when Lilia starts school, and that is not true. It's much harder when your children start school because you have to go and pick them up at really weird times throughout the day and bring them home for lunch and etc. We didn't have enough money to call on babysitters. We never had an au pair. The house is far too small for that. So I guess that it was just José and I really juggling things. Yes, they were early mornings, but then I was home. I was home by 9, and that was the end of my day. And then the translating was perfect because that was something that I did at home. I remember at the tail end of working in films for Mary, when Lilia, by this time she was probably 2 or 3, and I'd started working for the same producer, but much more from home. And I can remember working in that front room on my computer, completely stressed out, working on some film. And Lilia would arrive from nursery school probably with her daddy. And I can remember saying, in a minute, darling, just wait a minute, darling. And that was huge in my decision to stop all of that. And the combination of yoga and translating, it worked. Plus having a husband who was able to be a little bit flexible as well.
Having control of your time.
Within reason, yes.
Yeah. Then you transitioned to normal classes. Mm-hmm. When I arrived in the area, it seemed like every woman was transitioning into being a yoga teacher. We've seen how you stood out from the others with those intense months of practice. How did you manage once you were going into normal classes? How do you manage to get people to come to your classes?
So I do think there's room for everyone. If you're good at what you do, and this is my feminist side coming out, I saw something recently that said the reason that women feel this sense of competition with each other is that we've been taught that there are only so many places at the table for women, and it's just not true. There's room. Of course, there are men yoga teachers as well, but a lot of them are women. So I do think if you're good at what you do, you will find your niche. My yoga is very different to bulk standard yoga, I would say. It's very intuitive. We work around the postures, but the postures aren't the aim of the practice. I'm not interested in making photographs for Instagram or doing the perfect shape. My students listening to this, if there are any, will laugh when I say that, because that's one of my major themes. So not everyone that comes to my class is looking for that. We also live in an area where a lot of people are only interested in getting beach ready, and I say that in inverted commas. So there was a huge fashion fad, and sounds derogatory, but for boot camps, for example, everyone just wanting to lose weight, and I would just sort of stand at a distance and kind of chuckle to myself because they would spend a month doing the most horrendous boot camp exercises, losing weight, and all any of them could dream about was when they could have their next glass of champagne and their next donut, or, whereas yoga is a lifelong practice. I also would chuckle because I'd recuperate quite a few people from those boot camps that had been injured during them, blowing my own trumpet a little bit. But my style of yoga is not for everyone. There are people that will come and think, they're more interested in power yoga. I always say that finding a yoga teacher is like finding a psychologist. There are so many different styles. My pet hate is when people say, oh, I tried yoga once and I didn't like it. You just can't say that, because it's going to depend on the voice of the person. It's going to depend on the studio, the space. It's going to depend on the energy within that space. And then, of course, there's the style of yoga. I kind of hesitate to call my yoga gentle, because people immediately think boring. I prefer to call it kind or intuitive, respectful, humbling. But obviously some people come and that's not what they're looking for, so they don't stay. And that's kind of wonderful too, because the people that do stay have been with me for years and years, and we're growing older together, and then other people arrive and there's already this wonderful energy in the group. And so they feel completely at home straight away. We have a laugh, it's not too serious. It's certainly not the kind of class where you're copying what the teacher does. God help you. Because back when I started, it would have been quite difficult to copy what I do. Now, if you try to copy what I do, you'll be there with a bad hip and a bad shoulder and a bad knee, etc. So it's very inclusive. How did I find people? Social media. A little bit, mainly word of mouth. And that's why it's been quite hard. What has been quite hard is to find my niche within the French population, because another friend of mine, wonderful business coach, said to me once, the pool is much bigger. If you go for the French population, your pool is much bigger. It hasn't worked for me like that. I do have a class in French once a week, but the majority of my classes are in English, and that is a direct result of the word of mouth influence. With regards to social media, Facebook is my friend, MailChimp. I was very pleased at one of my meetings with the Riviera entrepreneurs recently. A lady stood up to talk about social media, and she said actually the best way, the most efficient way, is email. And I was like, yes. I thought I was very old-fashioned, but actually that is the way of getting your name out there. I play with Instagram. Instagram came into its own during COVID because I was teaching online classes then. So I was trying to appeal to more of a worldwide audience. And I still play with the idea of going back online for that reason, but I adore the physical connection with my students. Online yoga has its place. COVID taught us that. It really did work, but it's not quite the same. I think my advice would be to anybody looking to start a business in France, get involved with. There are many. Back then, there was just this one little group. There are many entrepreneurial groups these days, and they are so worth being part of. The advice, the support, just the company sometimes, because I'm lucky because I have my students as my company, but if you're at home working as a translator, for example, although thank you AI, that's a job that's going out of business now. But, company is hugely important. Just little things like Riviera Entrepreneurs, run by the beautiful Zoe. They have a Christmas party every year. When you're working for yourself, you don't have a Christmas party. And the wealth of advice out there is fantastic.
How do you describe a day, or a week? How long do you spend teaching versus the time you spend during admin work? Because even for yoga, I'm sure there's some admin work and some marketing work. How does it balance?
So I am older now. I'm 65. I'm nearing, I'm not going to retire, but I do have slightly less energy. I think if I was younger and more energetic, I would be organising retreats and travelling abroad, and there would be a lot more admin involved with all of that. I don't have the energy for that anymore. I kind of feel that I've been there and done that, and I'm very happy with the balance, my life-work balance at the moment. So admin is really just checking up on who's paid and who hasn't, and doing my monthly accounts. But I kind of keep on top of that throughout the month. I declare once a month to URSSAF, which is where we pay our social charges, blah, blah, blah. That's really the only admin that I do. I could be doing a little bit more. As I say, I've been through phases of doing little yoga snippets on Instagram, sending out more regular newsletters. I have been a little bit remiss with that. I'm actually very blessed, and I live a very tranquil life with a very pleasant balance, but I kind of feel that I deserve that. I have no intention of stopping my classes ever, for as long as I possibly can. One of my students sent me an article just the other day about a lady in France, a yoga teacher, who's 104. So I still have time.
This wouldn't happen in film production. You couldn't be producing.
Do you know, I couldn't even, I left film production, 45, and I was already beginning to become one of those embittered production coordinators, because you're surrounded by young clapper loaders. For example, one springs to mind. A clapper loader is the young boy or girl who's been lucky enough to get a foot through the door of the film business and who claps a little wooden thing at the end of each shot. I can remember being on a film and the clapper loader came to the production office to complain because the television in his room only had 5 channels, let's say. I just do not have the patience for that anymore. I've seen too much of the world, the horrors of the world, to have any. And I didn't want to become that embittered old production coordinator, so no. However, as a yoga teacher, there will be no bitterness, quite the contrary, and so I can carry on until I am 104.
Wonderful. Let's reflect on how this path has shaped you and this experience. Looking back, would you do anything differently?
Gosh, that's such a good question. I think not. I think I've been really, even, that painful experience of leaving Lilia. I missed her first steps because I was in London on that film. But, that's what made me so determined to find a different way of making some kind of living. I'm very grateful that I listened to my sister when she talked to me about yoga as my baby and how we need to nurture. So anyone out there who has an idea for a business or a career, I think if you're able to do it, because I know, as I say, I had the financial support, even if it wasn't huge, but we managed, of my husband. I do know it's not always that easy. But if you can do everything possible to nurture your dream, I think that's hugely important, to give it your wholehearted attention, which is something I often say in yoga. Every single experience, even the most painful experience of going through infertility, and I can't tell you how painful that was, has made me a kinder person, a more compassionate person. So no, I have no regrets, as the great Edith Piaf said, and I honestly don't think I would have done anything differently.
How is the financial transition? Because it's true that in film we get paid quite.
Well, do you know, it's funny you say that, and it's not true. However, I started working in films in 1984. By the time I finished in 2006, let's say, my salary had really not moved very much. So it was a huge salary when I started, and it moved a little bit. But when you calculate the hours that you do for that work and the periods of time that you're unemployed, you know, it's not that miraculous. Again, I say that blithely. I know that there are people holding down 3 jobs and not earning a living wage. But it was difficult. I remember, again, that famous year of 2009. I remember it so clearly, sitting at that table in tears, thinking we would never, ever in our lives be able to go to a restaurant again. You know, oh, poor me. I know that's such a first world problem. But it was. I remember coming back from holiday and putting both my credit cards in the machine, and even my magic credit card wouldn't give me any money. And that's when I kind of thought, no, I have to go and get a job, and that's when I decided to take the yoga more seriously. So yeah, you know, we don't travel abroad. We have a second-hand camper van. Before that, we would take our tent, you know, so we live very simply. We were lucky enough we have a little house, which is unusual on the Côte d'Azur, but we have a little house that we bought before the crisis. So even back then, it was still in francs at the time, and even then it was a big budget for us, but nothing compared to prices of property these days. You know, I went through university, but I didn't have a student loan. I'm from the 60s. I'm very blessed, and the same for José. So we stopped going to restaurants. We stopped buying clothes. I depend on my sister to give me all of my clothes. We live simply, and it's worth it. We went to Venice when Lilia was little to visit a friend who was still very much in the film business. She was working on the film with Johnny Depp and Angelina Jolie in Venice. Yes, the money is a draw, but oh my God, when she started talking about Angelina's people, and I just thought, no, I couldn't do that again. So the sacrifice is worth it.
What's the most valuable lesson you've taken from your experience?
To be passionate, if at all possible, to do something about which you're passionate. You know, I can wake up in the foulest mood, I really can, and then I go to yoga and I walk into that studio and my students are there, and my darling husband is often there as well, so even he gets to see the transition, and I'm just a different person. It's not just, yoga is hugely to thank for that, but it's the fact that I'm passionate about it.
What are your students teaching you?
My students teach me something every single time. Every time. That's the thing about this yoga as well. I don't think it's necessarily true of all yoga styles, although I might be wrong. But every time I put my mat onto the ground and start rolling around, because that's usually how I start, I learn something new. Every time I put my hands on a student's body, I learn something new. every time a student comes to me with an injury, I learn something new. Every time I have an injury, I learn something new. No, my students, I would not be the person that I am without my students. I sometimes feel I should pay them, but don't say that too loudly.
Maybe they will hear this.
Yes.
How do you think your life might have unfolded if you hadn't made the move?
Oh, I dread to think. I dread to think. That's a real sliding doors question, isn't it? In book club, we just read an amazing book called The Names, which is all about those sliding doors moments. I have no idea, Cecile.
Is there a proud moment when you thought, yes, I've made it?
I very occasionally ask my students, again, this is when I'm being good about admin and websites, I ask for testimonials and they bring me such joy. I'm lucky enough to get that in person quite a lot as well. Just people who come to me and say what they felt during a class, how their life has changed, how that moment has changed. That is so rewarding. And so every single time that happens, I think, yes, you're in the right place. Of course I have moments of doubt. Of course I do. I occasionally turn up for class and there are 2 people. I once turned up only once in my whole career and there was nobody. Actually, that is something that I kind of wish I had given more thought to. I have learned as it's gone along, but the whole payment thing, I wish I'd given a little bit more thought to that in the beginning. It took some mistakes I feel now I've come to a place where that's good. It's a tricky one when you're self-employed, and especially in something like yoga, which you feel often you should be sharing for free. You know, it's the same with meditation or any of these kind of spiritual practices. It's a difficult balance. But then what I would find was if I hadn't asked people to commit, I need to commit when I'm doing an activity. If I've committed financially, I'm more likely to turn up. But if I hadn't asked people to commit and then I would turn up and there'd be 1 or 2 people in the class, resentment started coming in. And that's not a nice feeling and it's not a healthy feeling. And so although it was a long time ago now, but I took that step to ask people to commit to 10 classes. I still have the flexibility. It's valid for 12 weeks because I can't quite, and I am pretty rubbish at really insisting, but I try my best. That's important. I think that's to do with respect, mutual respect.
Do you think it's something that we find quite often here, people who say something and don't really commit?
I can't say that I've really come across that. The occasional person who's never met me, who phones and says I'll be along on Friday and then they don't turn up. That happens quite a lot. But that doesn't bother me in the slightest because I'm going to be teaching on Friday anyway. But I also, I really do understand, as I say, the nature of the area in which we live. It's very difficult for people to commit. I've always really made a point of keeping my door open. Nobody must ever feel that if they've had to stop coming to yoga for years even, that they're then not welcome to come back. There was a period in Roquefort where I really was flavour of the month and I had so many students I didn't know what to do with them. And I knew at that time that I was flavour of the month and that it wouldn't necessarily last. And sure enough, then something else comes along. And of course, people want to try different things. I get that too. So no, I wouldn't say that people, I think the word you might be looking for is flaky. I don't think people are, not in my experience. They have other commitments. They have other things that come up at the last minute. And I do feel that, again, respect is very important and it's always appreciated if people let me know. But the door is still open even if you don't.
And let's move to life here on the Riviera and what it means to you today. Would you say life on the French Riviera is as glamorous as people imagine?
No, I wouldn't. And I mean, there are pockets of glamour. I can't say that I'm part of any of those pockets. So when I first moved here, I was in Monaco. I was based in Monaco, and I was actually living in a penthouse that belonged to Julian Lennon. So that was very glamorous. And Monaco itself is, I mean, it's an extraordinary place to visit. It's a lovely place to visit because although there are cameras everywhere, it does mean that you feel extremely safe. It's a beautiful place to visit, but it's a weird place to live. We live in a little village away from the coast. Isn't glamorous at all. In fact, every time my sister, as I say, she keeps me dressed. And every time she goes to give me something glamorous, I say, I'll never ever wear that. So I think there are pockets of glamour. I'm not involved in those. I do work once a year for the Monaco TV festival. It started as a job that I used to do for 3 months every year. It's now gone down to 3 days every year. And it's just like dipping a toe into that world once again. So those are my 3 days of glamour, surrounded by TV stars and the occasional film star and royalty and what have you. But otherwise, no, it's a beautiful place to live. For me, the main attraction, and it sounds so superficial, but it's the weather. It really is the weather. That was true of Madrid as well. We have our fair share of rain, we have our fair share of cloudy days, but they're always interspersed with sunshine and light. And to me, that's just, I've realised it's so important. I'm also really happy that we live in the back country, so we're surrounded by greenery and hills. When I first moved here, we lived nearer to the coast, and I'm not a mad coast person. Coming here to the hills, I realised why. It's because the Mediterranean particularly, on a beautiful day, it's stunning. On a miserable day, it's grey and flat and dead. Whereas here in the hills, on a miserable day, it's moody and misty and there's wood smoke, and so I'm very happy. So, yeah, I wouldn't say glamorous, but there's a quality of life which is in huge part due, I think, to the weather.
What's the most iconic place in the region, in your opinion?
I guess Valbonne. It's where I teach. And it's the place that all of my visitors fall in love with. It's your iconic French village. It's very Anglophone now, it's quite touristy, but it's still a living village. There are still proper, real people that live there and work there. Saint-Paul-de-Vence I also love for that same reason. It's very touristy, full of art galleries, but there are real people who live there too.
And do you have a hidden gem?
Oh, I used to. When we first moved here, the river, the Lou, was barely known. And I can remember walking the whole length of the river in our swimming costumes, swimming naked in pools. Now it's overrun by canyoners, these, in their wetsuits and Smurf helmets. And I think it must have appeared in so many guidebooks. It's not the same thing at all. But back in the day, it was completely deserted. And we would do the whole canyoning trip, it's kind of 3 kilometres down the river in our swimming costumes, just jumping off of rocks. And so that was my hidden gem. Unfortunately, it's no longer. You can go in the winter months, but you certainly can't swim.
Pretty cold, I'm sure. Do you see the Riviera as your forever home?
I do see the Riviera as my forever home. Funnily enough, we came back from our latest camper van trip this summer, and my husband was saying, do you think we could survive on this much money if we just went off travelling for the rest of our lives? And I said, you know what, Jose, I really do not want to leave here. My students, my friends, my book club, my mahjong club, my aqua velo, my yoga, my garden, my house. I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave. That used to be a dream of mine. I used to think in retirement, we'll just get in the camper van and head off. At the moment, that isn't my dream anymore. I'm very, very happy here. It's my forever home, yes.
Great. Faye, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. Your journey is a wonderful reminder that change can lead to unexpected fulfillment and that passion, when shared, has the power to inspire others.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you for listening to this episode of Living the Dream French Riviera. A very special thank you to Faye for her honesty, her wisdom, and the calm strength that runs through her story. If this conversation resonated with you, please follow the podcast, leave a review, or share it with someone who might need to hear it. It really helps the show grow. You can find more about Faye and all my guests at livingthedreampodcast.com, where you can also support the podcast if you'd like to help me continue sharing these stories. Season 2 is currently in preparation, and I would truly love your input, whether that's ideas, themes, or guest suggestions. A heartfelt thank you to Claire Long for the beautiful music that accompanies each episode. I'm Cécile Liconnet, and this has been Living the Dream, French Riviera. À bientôt!